Hi, all. Nice to meet you. My name's Arni. I am the Director of Solutions Engineering at CaptivateIQ. I have been in the ICM space from the last almost 7 years now. I'm excited to be on this webinar and happy to answer any questions that come up. I'll pass it to Rosalyn.
Yeah, thank you, Arni. So I'm Rosalyn Santa Elena. I am the founder, actually, of the RevOps Collective. We are a consulting, coaching, and community company focused on revenue operations. I am super excited to be here, so thank you for having me, and also happy to answer questions and share any information as well. I am super passionate about sales compensation. It's actually how I got my kind of ops career started, moving over from the finance side over to the dark side of sales. Started writing compensation, and the rest is sort of history 22 years later. So excited to be here.
Cool. Thanks for that, Rosalyn. In terms of our agenda, I have the slide up on my screen right now. So that's what we are going to be covering today: elements of a strong compensation plan, and how do you go about aligning incentives with business goals, how to manage change as things shift in the market in your org, and then signs to know when your compensation plan isn't working. I'll keep the slide up for a few seconds as people join the Zoom, and then we can take it down and dive into the conversation. Whoops. Do you want to kick things off with your views on elements of a strong compensation plan, Rosalyn?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that sales comp, it's, why I'm so passionate about it is because I really look at sales comp as really probably the most powerful tool in sort of our toolkit for the organization to really drive not just revenue and growth, but really ensure go-to-market success, right? And really be able to clearly help articulate the go-to-market strategy, make sure that we use the comp plan really to make sure that the organization is focused on the things that matter and the objectives that we're trying to hit. And really, as we talk about a lot, compensation is really about driving the right behaviors, right, to drive those desired outcomes. And so if you do it right, which I definitely will talk about, but I think if you do it right, it really can be the biggest differentiator in the team's ability to not only motivate and reward achievement against those goals, but help keep everybody aligned and focused on the right things. So I think that's, if you think about kind of the key elements of the plan, it is making sure that it is very much aligned to your strategy. You're thinking about the things that matter, and then you're aligning the roles to those very clear objectives that you want them to achieve.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel like a lot of, especially younger stage companies, come up with a compensation plan that may or may not closely tie out with their strategy moving forward, with their go-to-market strategy, and a compensation plan is just put out there because you have to do one.
Yeah.
But super critical that you understand what sort of behaviors you want to drive, and also what are the key goals that the business is trying to hit, so that you can tailor your compensation plan to meet those goals, and have your reps pump out productivity and goals that align with your strategy.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, when we talk about sort of like the good elements and the bad, it's really easy to kind of talk about all the things that, that organizations do wrong, right? Some of the common mistakes. So I don't know if you want to start there, but I think, with sales comp, it's like you said, it's something that they have to do. Everybody knows we need it, and they know that it can do all these great things to help drive different kinds of behaviors, but it's always so difficult. I mean, you'd get a chance to talk to lots of customers, right, around compensation. And I talk to a lot of, operations as well as sales and marketing leaders just around, why is comp so hard, right? So I'm happy. Obviously, we probably have a long list of things in terms of like, what do businesses do wrong? I don't know if you want to talk through that. Definitely happy to give some of that. And I think maybe that would be good color in terms of, what people do wrong, so we can start to talk about what did you do right.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start there.
Awesome. Awesome. Do you want to start or do you want me to start if I have a long list of things?
Sure, I can kick things off. So the biggest one that I run into is just folks over engineering their plans, adding way too much complexity to the plan. One, from a maintenance administration perspective, it just becomes very error prone because there's so much going on. There's just so much to calculate on and track towards, and that just becomes so complex over time that it becomes super hard to truly dive into the data and understand where things are headed. And also, obviously, it doesn't motivate the reps because they just don't understand their own plans really well, because they're just so complex. And a lot of the number one complaints that sales reps have on their mind is, I don't understand my plan. I just look at my my commission statement and I'm like, okay, this is what I'm getting paid this month, but I have no idea of understanding. So I think just over engineering the plans is one of the biggest ones that I would like to flag.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think when we were chatting before, I was telling you how I just remember when I first started managing compensation that, one of our top sales rep back then, and this is back in 2001, I guess. And it stuck with me all these years because like he literally stood up in the sales kickoff and was like, I have a, bleeping MBA and I can't figure out my comp plan, right? Are you going to be able to fix this? I just remember him saying that. And I feel like fast forward, all this time, I still hear that from a lot of sales reps, right? That they don't understand their plan. They just get a check and they're like, okay, it looks about right, what I'm expecting. And that to me is a big fail, right? In your compensation plan. To your point about making it too complex, they just over-engineer too many components, too many variables, too many data points, just too many calculations, right? Making it super hard for the participants to understand the plan and what you're asking them to do, but also super difficult to administer, right? Kind of be on the other side is being able to administer the plan accurately and on time, which is really important. I also think sometimes in comp plans, one, they make it too complex because they're trying to put every single thing that they want a rep to do into the plan, which a lot of that does not need to be in the compensation plan. But also because I think if you make the plan too subjective, or it's not super clear, then there's exceptions and there's changes, and then it just kind of really dilutes the effectiveness of the plan. The other thing I would say that I see a lot of companies doing wrong, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, just about this aligning the plans to not just the strategy and the goals, but also, the roles and responsibilities of that role. Right. We have multiple roles in the go-to-market organization, but making sure that you create a comp plan that, one, ties to what you want that individual or that person to do, but also what they can actually impact, right? A lot of times we say, oh, we want them to do this, but can they actually go do that? And if they actually do that, are they able to actually move the needle on that? So you want to make sure that you're aligning or you're designing compensation plans that are actually things that they can actually impact and influence, that are tied to those behaviors that, you want, ultimately what those outcomes to be. The other thing I would say that I also see a lot of mistakes made from organizations is, we spend all this time on designing the plan, right? And then we don't, sometimes we forget to, when we roll out the plan, it's like we're rushing to just get it out, get the plan out and get it started and then move on with the year. So we don't take the time to actually communicate to all of the participants, because it's what a great opportunity, right? When you launch a new plan to really kind of do that rah and, be really excited about the plan. And demonstrate the fact that, hey, we learned from last year's plan, for example, we took your feedback, and really show and demonstrate to the organization that the plan is really tied to our go-to-market strategy, right? What we're trying to achieve, and helping those participants understand that, how they're going to get paid and how, what we're asking them to do, but also how, if they do those things, that they're going to get rewarded and paid. And if they do more of those things, they're going to make even more money, right? And really take that opportunity to help them understand the structure of the plan, the why behind it, right? The components and expectations, but also how can they see that path to success, right? And really enable them. Because one of the things that I done in my past when, we're rolling out plans is just to make sure, even if the plan hasn't changed a lot, if it's a yearly plan, even if it hasn't changed a lot, you still want to go through that process, because it's a great opportunity to just share about your thought process behind the plan, reiterate the strategy, but then also let the team have an opportunity to ask questions and make sure that everybody understands, what their plan, how their plan was designed and how they can make money. Because I think if you don't do that, and you kind of skip over that, then you get into this. It's very easy for people to, have all these misconceptions about the plan, and, not understand how they're getting paid. So I think that's probably a long list of things that people do wrong.
The last point you made around the why behind it is super, super critical, in my opinion. It's super important that you explain to the reps that, hey, we've done our research. Here's our go-to-market strategy. Here's why we believe in what we want you to do, rather than just say, hey, we just want you to do more of this over that. Then it doesn't land with the reps, and they don't truly believe in what you're wanting them to do.
Yeah. And I love that, kind of sharing also that path to success, right? Showing them that, hey, if you do these things that we're asking you to do, which is part of your role and you're good at and you were hired to do, then you're going to have a path to making, earning your commissions, but also earning above, and beyond, and sort of that path to being able to be, to the upside and be able to earn more. But yeah, I think I see a lot of companies kind of go through so much work to design the plan and then not take the opportunity to really share that win and use it as an opportunity to promote your comp plan as a motivating, tool for the organization, versus like, oh, plans are out again, and here's your plan, and we're going to administer it again. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, one of the cool things that I ran into working with one of our customers was that they did an amazing job at explaining how the plan works, and also tied it back to some results. For example, what they did was they went around and asked their team, what's your dream number? What do you want to make as a rep this year? And someone said, I want to make $500,000. And then they built out a model that basically forecasted that if you sell X quantities of product A, Y quantities of product B, here's like a mix of things you could do. And this is how you would go about making $500,000 this year. That was super, super motivating for reps. And this model kept on updating as you went through the year. And it kept showing the rep that this is how you can make your dream number this year. And that was pretty influential for the business.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Just even a simple calculator, right? I mean, ideally you do it in in commission software, but even if you don't have that, even if it's something that's in Excel, just being able for people to individually plug numbers in that are realistic, to be able to show that they can actually, again, that path to success. Because, it's much easier when you actually see the numbers. And like you said, hey, I have this goal of $500,000, and here's how, these are the things I need to go do to actually be able to be successful. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, to that point, a software tool definitely makes it easier, where there are things like a what if calculator baked in, and you could basically, as a rep, just jump in and plug in some numbers, and it predicts this is how much more you can make if you did all this and close your pipeline out.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Do you want to shift to maybe things that you could be doing right, the things you've seen comp plans doing well?
Yeah, I briefly already touched on this, but just adding some data points that motivate reps. That's a big one out there, and not just laying the plan out, but also telling the reps that, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, this is how you can make more money. It could just be a simple what if calculator, or it could be a sophisticated model that you bake out into your calculations logic that basically says that, okay, if you do, like I was saying, if you want to make $500,000, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and this is how you get there. That can be a pretty big motivation for a sales rep who's in line with the goals of the business, and also very cognizant of their own goals. In that case, it could be a big win, where they know exactly what needs to happen for them to hit their personal goal.
I agree. I think, when I think about like when I've designed comp structures, I always have sort of these guiding principles, right, around, some of the things that we already talked about, because I think about, always, right, always focusing on the strategy, right, and what are those objectives and outcomes. So I've seen good comp plans are really easy to understand how they tie back, right, to either your corporate or your go-to-market strategy. And those objectives, right? So that every person can see how their plan and what they're being asked to do aligns back to the bigger goals. And even, I guess, even for outside of compensation, right? It's outside of sales commissions, even for any role, right? You want to be able to understand how what you're doing is tied to the overall company goals. But making sure that, you're always aligned to that, driving and kind of providing incentive towards the right behaviors, right, to drive those outcomes. And again, just kind of the right focus for the right role, I think is always really important, that you make sure that you go through that exercise when you're designing your plans of looking at every single role and asking yourself and asking the management team around, what is it that we want this role to achieve, right? And in SaaS, obviously, for a lot of AEs, it's like, we want them to go acquire net new logos, right? We want them to acquire ARR. We want them to, do all these things. And I think that I see a lot of companies where, we want them to forecast accurately. We want them to update the CRM. So they try to put all of these things into the comp structure, where I'm like, those don't belong in a comp plan. Those are base pay, right? Those are, be a good corporate citizen. And, part of your pay is base pay to go do those things, but more of the things that you need to drive around revenue targets and some of those things. So I think keeping the plan simple, like we talked about, is really important, right? Making sure that it's easy to understand, it's easy to measure success against those plans. And they have to be plans that someone can actually timely and accurately administer, right? I'm sure you've probably seen this with customers, where they design these really elaborate plans, looks great, but if they don't have the data or the information to be able to actually administer them, then it's like, then the plan is a big fail, right? It's not going to be successful. So I think reducing that complexity, keeping it simple, removing any subjectivity. Oh gosh, that's like always a pain point, right? There's lots of things that's gray. Removing as much of that, I think, is really important. And then the other thing I would just say around good plans that we've kind of talked about already is just reward for performance, right? It's really focusing in on the accountability and the impact side of the house, and just really making sure that that the individual can actually impact and influence the numbers to be able to perform well. And then what's the last thing around guiding principle? I think it's just the communication, right, that we kind of talked about. It's just really clear communication and be transparent, right? The worst thing is when you talk about somebody's pay and you're trying to hide anything, or people get the perception that you're trying to hide something, or secretly you're trying to hold back, from paying them. I think being super transparent in your policy and your processes, and, like you mentioned about the calculator, like how people get paid, is really important because it's somebody's paycheck, right? I think about that, like when I talk to people about, like, imagine if it's your own pay, like your base pay, right? For those of us who maybe don't have a big variable, if you think about your base pay, like how would you feel if every time your base pay, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, sometimes you get the right amount, sometimes it could be off, it's like that's somebody's pay and they depend on that. So I think being super transparent in how someone's getting paid, and then just making sure that you're enabling, right? Always enable and train on the comp structure.
Yeah, you made a great point there around data and how do you measure how plans are working. I think that's a common one that a lot of folks miss out on when designing and thinking about designing a comp plan. Yeah. They're not thinking about the end result. What are things that we want to measure here, and how do we even measure them? You made a point around not having good data. That's a huge miss that we see in the industry, where folks don't have the right data points to calculate commissions, and they don't think about what sort of reporting do they want at the end of the day. And that means they're just simply running compensation without really a true picture of where things stand right now and what else they could be doing to hit their goals and succeed as a business. So that's another critical piece. that folks need to be thinking about, like, hey, what sort of reporting do we want out of the commission tool or our commission calculations, and what insights is that giving us? For example, a common one could be, which is our best performing region, team, plan, things like that, that give you enough insight to be able to say that here's my top performing rep that maybe doesn't need so much coaching, versus here's my not so great or well doing rep here that I need to focus more on, so that we can help them hit their goals and also help sell more deals for the business.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I think a lot of companies also make a mistake in, right? Around not just the data and the ability to have the right information when they're designing their plans, but also not going back and looking, right, at how effective the plan is.
Yep.
Because a lot of us think, I think a lot of companies do this, like at the end of the year, they mad scramble to design a comp plan, right? And in the middle of when it's, the busiest time of the year when they're trying to close deals. And then they just go out with what they think they can do, and then they just roll it out, and it's almost like a check the box versus, really taking the time to continuously look at your plan throughout the year. It doesn't mean that you're going to constantly make changes, because that's a whole nother, topic of things that go wrong, but definitely around just measuring and making sure that the plan is tracking the way you're expecting. Right. So every month that you're paying, or every quarter, you're doing a review, and to understand if the levers that you put in place in your comp structure are actually yielding the results that you were expecting, right? Are they driving the right behaviors that you were expecting? Is the payouts aligned with your comp philosophy and what you originally expected in terms of modeling? Or if they're not, right? And maybe there's ways to kind of tweak during the year. You can offer, incremental like spiffs or different programs, kickers, there's things that you can do without actually, revamping the structure of the comp plan, because it's very disruptive to do that, but more of a, some incremental kind of incentives to just drive something for a quarter, or for the first half, and to kind of get things back on track. But I think we forget to do that, right, around the gathering the feedback, and also, ask the participants, ask their reps, like, how's it going, right? How are they feeling about the plans, and gather that feedback for, so that you have it before you start getting into the next year's annual planning cycle too. Did we have other slides that you wanted to share too? I don't remember. Or just like, we could talk about comp all day long. So
no, there were, let me just double check, but I don't think there were other slides that I wanted to share. But we can just continue this conversation and maybe answer some of the questions that we have in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think we were also wanted to talk, maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into some of those measurements and metrics too. Like, I don't know what you've seen kind of on your side, or things that you recommend that, can tell, right, if your comp plan is actually working or not, right? We talk about how do you, gather that feedback, but also how do you know if your plan is working?
Yeah, that would be it would be a great topic to dive into next. How do you figure out how your plan's working or not? I think we talked about it a bit already. Just having really solid reporting around performance, like how are your reps performing by team, by region, and if you have great data from prior years, then that could be another data point that you look into, like that would flag things like seasonality during business, during quarters or months during a year. That would be a great data point to also look at. And besides that, just evaluating how things are progressing. Are they having the right impact in terms of the strategy you had put in place at the start of the year? And that can only be accomplished if you have really good data points out of your calculation engine that help you understand what those insights look like.
Yeah, I think that going back and kind of being really clear when you're designing the plan also, right? In terms of, being super clear on what those outcomes are expected to be by role. Like we used to do like a one pager on every single role, right? Kind of, what do we used to call it? And one of my companies, I think we call like a rap sheet. I like a roles accountabilities, and I can't remember what the P stands for, but it's more about, trying to be for every role being really clear on, what are the things that we want this role to be doing? How are we going to measure those things? And then what is the, what are the components that we're going to be using to drive those behaviors? And, we would go back and look at that, right, to make sure, and we look at all the population that's under that plan to see if it's actually being effective, right? Are we seeing a shift in, like if we had, for example, in the new year, if you applied something different to driving net new logos, right? Maybe you offered a bonus or kicker for something that's net new, did you see that increase in the plan year over year, at least quarter over quarter? Are you seeing a change, right? To see if those things are being effective. And because you should start to see an uptick in some of those areas. And then always making sure that your pay, what you're paying out is aligned with sort of your expectations around performance, right? So as you're seeing performance rise, obviously you want to see pay also go up. And then you can flag for any anomalies where if your payments are really high, but your company is not, achieving or hitting those goals, then there's something wrong with the plan, right? The plan isn't designed the right way. Because the idea is obviously for the company to achieve its goals and individuals to also achieve when you're, paying. So your budgets are aligned. I think there's a lot there as well. What other measurements? What other things around the comp plan? I mean, I definitely think that, constantly looking at the pay, looking at the, attainment overall. And like you said, we can slice and dice. If you have the data, you can slice and dice it multiple ways to understand, what's happening at a regional level, at a position level, across the funnel, right? Because ideally now it's, it's not just sales, right? That's really on the comp plan anymore. We have a lot of marketing folks now tied to revenue numbers. We have operations folks tied to revenue numbers. And I think that more and more companies are moving more towards a revenue kind of compensation plan than just for sales. Although sales tends to be the most, highly leveraged for sure.
Yeah, one other thing that I've seen work out pretty well is having a good forecast model out there. That helps you understand where your business is at right now. What would happen if 80% of your reps hit quota in the next 6 months? What would happen if 90% of hit the quota? Things like that really help you make business decisions for the upcoming quarters, months, whatever the case is, where you are able to see that right now we haven't had a great quarter or great half, but if we do X and Y based on this forecast model, then we would be able to hit our goals. For example, if 80%, if you're projecting that 80% of your reps are going to hit quota, then what do they need to do? The actuals right now are in front of us. And if we do 1.5x of business in the next 6 months, then we should be able to hit our goal. And that then gives you insights to understand what teams, what regions, or what specific reps need more coaching than others.
Yeah. It's such a powerful tool, right, around the analysis to determine kind of what's working and what's not, and where do you need to provide more insights or more coaching or more enablement or more resources, right? It's such a powerful place to really understand, especially, in this market, right? I mean, the market's been crazy the last couple of years, right? It's just been so crazy. And I think probably one of the things that's top of mind for folks are also like, how do you manage that change, right, within the market? Because, I think that the market is changing, organizations are changing, and how do you manage that change, especially when it comes to compensation? Yeah. Do you have any tips or anything that you're thinking about?
From my point of view, I think having a plan that is easy to manage, it's not over-engineered, goes a long way, because as things are changing, reporting will help you understand how things are shifting, if there's downturn, if your pacing ahead in terms of attainment, stuff like that, and that should help you make decisions. But if in an event you do want to make changes, if you're working with an over-engineered plan, then that's where you're going to run into a lot of trouble, because it'll end up costing you so much time just to update that plan that's already working in practice, versus a simpler plan allows you more agility, allows you to change things on the fly, and see what sort of impact this is going to have on the business, on the reps' performance, and also on money in terms of how much people are going to make, and then make informed decisions around, okay, this is not a huge change that we're going to be making over the next 3 to 4 months. If things are simple, then you're able to move quicker.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just keeping it simple, and you talked about over-engineered, and actually Stephen had a question in the chat around giving some examples of over-engineering the plans. And he says, I imagine things like accelerators are acceptable and encouraged. Yes, definitely. Yeah. But when do you get into too much variability? Yeah. Do you want to take that one first? I'll add on.
Sure. Yeah. In my opinion, what I've seen is adding way too many components to a plan, and to the point that Rosalyn made earlier, just adding in a lot of subjective things to the plan, like, hey, is your Salesforce up to date? Does your manager like you? Things like that. It's just over engineering, and things that you cannot measure and give consistent feedback on to reps through a tool or a commission platform. And just adding in way too many combinations in terms of products that could be sold. So if you sell multiple SKUs, adding in complicated scenarios where, hey, if you sell product A, B, and C in one deal, then you make X dollars, versus if you sell more of product C on 10 deals, then you make something else. It's just one, very hard to track. Two, the reps don't understand and remember all these finer details over time, and they just become confused that, hey, what is even happening to my compensation plan? How do I track some of these goals that have been put in front of me? So I think that's one example that comes to mind.
Yeah, I agree. I think just when you have too many components, and when I think of components, obviously different pieces of the plan, but also when you carve out somebody's variable into more than, 2, say, slices, then it becomes so small and such a small percentage of dollars that it becomes meaningless, right? I've seen plans. I've walked in a company where their comp plan for a standard AE had 7 components. And I was like, okay, by the time you get to like 2% of their annual variable tied to one component, it's meaningless. There's no focus, right? No focus is going to be placed there because it's such a small amount. So you start to carve out the variable and into these small pieces, then I think that's a huge mistake I think that companies make, because then it's just, again, no focus. The whole point of the compensation structure is to drive focus towards certain behaviors, right? And how do you do that is you put money on it, right? You carve out a piece of their compensation and tie it to that. And when Stephen mentioned accelerators, I also think, I think it's super important to have acceleration and upside in your comp plan, right? Because for a sales rep, they want to win, right? And they don't want to just make quota. They want to blow out their number, right? And be above and beyond, and not just for the money, but also just for that feeling of winning, which I think is really important. So definitely highly encourage, right? That you definitely need to have accelerators in the plans, but you don't have to have 6 or 7 tiers of accelerators, right? What you really need is something that shows, when people are incrementally over 100%, they earn more, right? And then you have tiers, but I mean, I would definitely, and I don't know what you think, Arni, I think 2 or 3 tiers max. I think if you start carving in like, every 5% of over 100, you start earning something different. It just makes it super complex and it doesn't really move the needle. I'm also like not a big fan of gates and caps. I know some people feel differently and will argue with me about this one, but I'm not a big fan of that, because I think that there's other ways that you can protect the company from a budget perspective. There's other ways of doing that than capping commissions. So yeah, I think too much, some of those things around too much variability is just making it complicated. Think about no more than 2 components, maybe a kicker if you're in SaaS for like multi-year, you have a couple of things that drive some incremental compensation. But I think once you slice it more than like 2 components, it becomes very meaningless and cumbersome to administer as well.
Yeah, we typically see about 3 tiers, like you said, Rosalyn, and yeah, capping, that's not a huge, yeah, it's a hot topic right now. Not a lot of people love that, especially sales reps, because in my eyes, you're basically demotivating your top performers from going above and beyond. You're basically saying, hey, once you've hit this gap, we're not going to pay you anymore. There's no longer any motivation for them to go out and do more business, right? They might as well just take the rest of the year off and be like, okay, I'm off.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very, I don't know, I think it's very demotivating to see the cap. And then there's also the gates, right? And I know a lot of companies like to do that. Like you don't earn anything, or you don't, or you earn less, up to a certain percentage. But I'm also just not a big fan of that, because I also think that when you're up to 100% of your quota, it's like $1 of revenue is worth whatever that percentage of commission dollars is, right? But anyways, I know that could be a whole nother session on debating that. Let's see what other questions we have in the chat. So it looks like Melinda had a question. Based on your experiences, what is an ideal design? I've seen super complex comp plans with multiple variability, so similar to kind of what Stephen was saying, and some are easily manageable. So a handful of ways to comp. Yeah. I think I've also seen lots of super complex comp plans, but I think just kind of going back to what we were talking about around just trying to keep it simple, making sure that you're, I think it's a delicate balance of sort of, you want it to be meaningful and have levers that will drive the behaviors, but at the same time, it's a delicate balance of when you're overly complex and, either the reps can't understand the plan or you can't administer it accurately. So Tanya asks, seeking perspective for a new commission plan our company rolled out. So I think looking for some content around the plan. This one looks like a longer version. So for example, yeah, and it looks like so she's got more questions about it. Let's take a look and see. And it looks like, I think Susanna may have asked her if she wanted to come on to screen and ask her a question, because it does look like a little bit more in depth. Maybe it's better to get context from her. I don't know, Tanya, if you're out there, if you want to jump on, let us know and we can kind of bring you on screen. Or you can, I guess, come off of mute.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. I was just looking for perspective. As a rep, I was looking for someone who, has maybe encountered this before and could help me see it through a different light. It was a drastic change for me, and being at the top of the leaderboard, I was a little shook by it. So I was trying to, get my bearings. But essentially, whereas our deals we're definitely MRR model, our deals are normally like average of 6 months. So you sell a deal, you hit quota, and you can see how that's going to pay out for you 6 months forward. Mm-hmm. If you don't hit quota, then, you're harder on yourself, right? Because you see what your deal is going to pay out 6 months forward, and it's not as great. The motivating factor in that is watching it grow ahead of you and striving to hit those months so that it grows. I understand the business problem of getting reps to hit quota with more consistency. But on this new plan, your entire book of business is based on what you sold the previous 30 days. So let's say I'm owed, backlog is 3 to 6 months, right? Because average is 6 months. And if I don't hit quota in February, then my March commission for my entire book of business that I'm owed on could be as low as 1%. If I hit quota, it could be 3%. But the unmotivating factor for me was that it almost felt like punishment, because months that I hit quota and I did a good job, it's almost like it's being taken away. It's being, ripped out from under you. So the incentive is for you to hit quota so that your entire book of business continues to be paid out at a higher rate. And it's just not something that I've encountered. And I've asked some mentors, through LinkedIn if they've experienced it, and I haven't found anyone. So I'm just kind of looking for perspective. And that's why, I signed up to come today to see, like, is this something that's new? I know a lot of people are experiencing changes in their comp plan right now. So I thought, maybe it is a new way to look at things.
Is it, is the messaging, because the way you've messaged it sounds like if you don't hit quota, you get paid at a lower rate for anything you closed in that month. But is it being
your entire book of business that you're owed on?
So legacy commissions, like from prior months,
Correct.
like things that you closed. Oh,
yeah. So every 30 days, that's why you can't predict it or forecast it or look forward. I don't know what my commission is going to be paying out at in June, because it's going to be dependent on if I hit quota in May or not.
So in
That
case
entire book of business could be 1%, or it could be 3% or 4%.
So if you do hit quota, do you get commissions from prior months to be trued up in case you missed the prior month?
Yes.
I was going to say, it sounds like the messaging, kind of the opposite messaging I was thinking would be, okay, you earn a base commission rate for everything you close in that month. But if you actually hit quota, then there's a higher rate paid. Right.
Correct.
But the way, right. So is that the messaging? I'm just trying to understand, like, how did this even get messaged?
Right. So the interesting part of it is that, having hit quota pretty consistently, it would be pretty level for me year over year. My performance were the same, but it should be incentivizing for reps that didn't hit quota, because they have the potential to make more the more often they hit quota, because their months they didn't hit quota, their deals are going to pay out. So that's the messaging to be positive. But when you are hitting quota, it's almost demotivating, because then you can't keep building that mountain ahead of you, and you can't keep, watching it grow and pushing yourself to watch it grow and stay motivated. So for me, it's more or less like, okay, now I look at every 30 days as deflating for months that may suffer, where I did put a lot of work in to earn those commissions.
Yeah. And the monthly, I mean, it sounds so complex, right? Because when you pay kind of in arrears on a monthly basis, it's already complex, right? For the comp structure. And then for the rate to change on prior transactions that that you closed in a previous month, but now it's kind of being earned, I guess, in the next month. That's not only really difficult to administer, but that kind of goes against all the stuff we were talking about earlier about keeping it simple, making it predictable, right? So that you can, understand how you're getting paid, like what you're going to get paid for when you close a deal. I'm trying to kind of understand the rationale. So the rationale sounds like it's just linearity. Like they want to try to get every rep to be able to bring in, because it's MRR, right? So they want them to be able to hit their monthly quota.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like, I feel like, and Arni, I don't know what you've seen, but I mean, I've never seen sort of the retro, it's almost like a retro application of a different commission rate, right? And typically it's like you see kind of MR coming in, but then you get paid a certain rate. But if you exceed your monthly quota, right, then there may be a kicker or an accelerator on that, on the portion that's above 100. But I haven't seen it really kind of fluctuate month to month. Like, do you have a monthly quota then, Tanya?
We do.
It is,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay. So that's how they measure whether or not you hit quota. But that monthly quota includes prior bookings, right? Because there's an assumption of a monthly quota that includes kind of legacy things that are kind of being amortized almost like across different months.
Yeah. The monthly quota, the payout rate for hitting quota impacts your previous book of business that has not been paid yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything like that before. I always like to, when at least kind of my own 2 cents, just when I'm designing plans, is obviously you want to tie the payout as closely in terms of timing to the actual event. Right. So the actual booking of that event, and monthly, if you say, okay, I booked a deal and every month you're getting paid on actuals, especially in like a usage-based type of business, then you're going to see that monthly come in and you get paid. I think that makes sense. But the fluctuation of the rate, that's
Right.
I would not be a big proponent of that. Although I don't, again, that's just kind of my 2 cents, just with the context that we have. Obviously, we don't know what the context is sort of behind the thinking of the comp plan design, but I think that seems not something that I've encountered. I don't know if Arni, if you've seen any of your customers or in your past life have seen something like that.
Yeah, I've seen a few examples out there, kind of very similar to what Tanya has been saying around how it functions. The whole idea behind the plan is that, hey, we want churn to be accounted into it. So if some of your accounts churn, then you get dinged for it as a rep. But what I haven't seen is the rate fluctuating. What I have seen is the rate remains fairly consistent. It's a lower rate. And then as soon as you play catch up and you've caught up to all the churn and things shifting or not being able to close in a month, as soon as that catch up happens, they basically pay you out at a higher rate and then true up all the historical deals. That's what I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely seen that as well. That's why I was kind of wondering about the positioning and the messaging, because it's almost like, okay, we'll pay you a lower rate if you don't hit quota, but if you do hit quota, then you get, kind of a higher rate on everything that either comes in that month or potentially retroactively, although that's very painful to administer too.
It is. It's a little complicated to see, but I appreciate you letting me to present it. Like I said, I've asked around and I've not had a lot of people experience it. And I wanted to make sure that I was thinking through all the facets of it fairly. So thank you for at least thinking about it.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. Were there any other questions? Let's take a look in the chat. If anybody has questions, please put them in the chat. See anything else, Arni, that we want to?
Yeah, there's a question from James that I was reading. Do you try to tie measurements to opportunity progression, qualified pipeline growth, etc., or are they not closely tied enough to light of sight revenue? You want to take
enough
that?
sight? Yeah. So James, it sounds like his question is, do we tie comp measurements to opportunity progression? I mean, definitely, I think from an ops and kind of revenue perspective, for sure, we want to measure, right? Opportunity progression. That's super important as things move from, kind of that pipeline velocity, from stage to stage. But I don't know that I would ever tie compensation necessarily to it. I think that's where we start getting into the too complex, kind of the other side of the too complicated, too many variables, because it's one thing to, monitor and track and coach and strategize to opportunity progression, but not necessarily tie pay to moving things across the pipeline. I think the only exception that I would say is just for like an SDR or a BDR role, right? If their role is to move something to qualified, right? Because they're having a meeting and trying to qualify customers or prospects, then that could be something I would think would be tied to comp. But I haven't seen like an account executive. I think that's where you start to get into the too complicated and trying to do too many things in the comp plan. I don't know, Arni, what do you think?
Yeah, agree with what you said. What I've seen in regards to data hygiene and upkeep is it's more on the RevOps or sales ops side, where the rules are baked into Salesforce or your CRM, ERP to ensure that your reps are doing the right things, and then you can report on those things and present back to the reps if they're not doing the right things. For example, if someone is closing an opportunity from qualification straight to close, they've missed so many steps in there. That should be highlighted in a report of some sort, and that should be a coaching that happens with the sales rep outside of compensation conversations.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's part of the whole base pay conversation. Yeah. What other questions do we have? Looks like Megan might have had a question more about SDR comp. I don't know. Megan, I don't know if you're still on. If you had a question, if you want to actually come off mute and just ask the question. Sometimes things get buried a little bit in the chat. No, she's still on. I don't see.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was asking, I'm in a situation where we really just do a one-factor comp plan for our SDRs, and it's just accepted opportunities from the AEs. And my biggest concern is the SDRs overachieving and but the company not closing deals and the company not achieving our revenue goals, and struggling with conversations with leadership on the SDR side in terms of putting a comp plan in place that kind of prevents that from, I don't want to say prevents it from happening, but somehow lets that as opposed to just putting it back on the AE, because some of the conversation is, well, the AE accepted the op, and so now it's off our plate. There's nothing we can do if it doesn't close.
Yeah. So I don't know, Arni, if you have some thoughts on this. I definitely have a couple.
Yeah, Megan, are you able to, are you measuring quality of SQOs or qualified leads currently being generated by SDRs that are being moved to the AEs? Is there something that says this was a great opportunity versus not?
So it's really left up to like the AE accepting their kind of determination. They have criteria based on, is there budget, is there business problems we can solve, and a timeline at which they'd want to implement us. But it's really just left up to that conversation between the SDR and the AE as to whether it's a qualified / good lead.
So are the SDRs asking those questions off of the prospect to start with? Or
Yeah,
is that conversation?
it should, those questions should be answered in the discovery call.
Yeah, so from what I'm hearing and what I've seen in the industry is that some of those data points get captured somewhere along the lines, whether it's in your CRM or some other software where the SDR basically flags that we did ask X, Y, and Z question, it meets our criteria. So that should be enough information to say, yes, this was a qualified opportunity, and it gets moved to the AE. And the only time then the AE has a chance to say this was not qualified is if they ask specific questions of the prospect and the answers they're getting are completely opposite to what was reported, which should be pretty rare if the SDR is doing their job.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what I would just add, Megan, because I've seen sort of this go sideways sometimes, is because the AEs will just approve everything because they want their SDR to get paid. So a couple things. One is having not just the SDR, having another additional kind of approval or review, kind of to Arni's point that it should, if you're using BANT or using MEDDIC or whatever methodology you're using, there's probably going to be a couple of things that the SDR has to have, documented in the CRM before a deal can actually move to that, to an AE, but also before the AE can approve and accept the opportunity, having another check, right? Whether that is an SDR manager or it's like an independent party, like in my RevOps role, like we would do that, right? We had an SDR ops person that would actually review the opportunities before they could be approved. And there was a step in there that, ops would have to approve before it could be approved by the AE, or before the SDR could be paid on the opportunity. And that's just a second check because it's just a, kind of a external, outside view, kind of a non-biased view to make sure that the information that was completed around the qualification, makes sense. Right. And that it's good to move on. And then the other thing is having a lot of accountability around the AE's pipeline. right? Because if an AE is going to be scrutinized for the opportunities that they've accepted and really pushed to say, hey, you said this was a good op, how come it's not moving through the funnel, right? And being really a lot of scrutiny there and accountability there, that will also help kind of push the AE to be much more, diligent in accepting an opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay.
The last point that Rosalyn, sorry,
Yeah.
someone was.
No, go ahead.
The last point that Rosalyn made to that, like if the AE is accepting all the opportunities and then dequeuing them in the next X number of days, whatever that looks like for your business, then that should highlight that the AE is accepting all and not really paying attention to whether it was a good SQO or not.
Yeah. The other thing, Megan, that I've also done in past life is actually have there's kind of two steps to the SDR compensation. And again, kind of trying to keep it simple, but also being really clear on, when it moves to a certain stage, when it's been qualified, that there's some type of comp being paid. But if it moves further along in the funnel, then there's an additional piece. Let's just say like if it was 2%, they get 1% upfront when the AE accepts, they get the other part of their, another part of compensation if it moves beyond that, right? To kind of the next stage, right?
No,
because that way
puts a lot of the accountability back on that pipeline progression piece also.
yes.
Because I think that's the big thing we're missing is one, I like that kind of independent third party to say, yes, it should be accepted, but then the pipeline accountability is huge because
Yeah.
what I fear is a lot just sitting in that stage one and it really isn't going anywhere, but yet we're, SDRs are making a lot of money.
Yeah. And it's not
without
necessarily
company goals being achieved, which is
that's right.
happy to
Yeah.
pay if company goals are being achieved also.
That's right. And that's kind of goes
Great.
back to the analysis of seeing it as a plan being effective, right? And you're clearly saying that there's a misalignment. You're seeing that. And that's where, I think some additional rigor around approvals as well as accountability makes sense. And then maybe, trying something a little bit different with the comp structure too.
Great. I like that. Thank you so much. I appreciate the insight.
You're welcome.